Everyone knows the name Al Capone, the man Hollywood turned into the face of organized crime in America. Machine guns, bootleg alcohol, blood-soaked streets of Chicago. That's the image most people have. But the real story is far more unexpected. What if I told you that Capone hated his most famous nickname, that his own brother worked on the side of the law, and that the government couldn't actually prove he was a killer? Instead, they brought him down for something far less dramatic: taxes. Today, we uncover 6 shocking facts about Al Capone that sound almost too strange to be true, but every single one is rooted in real history. Part 1. The making of a legend. Alphonse Gabriel Capone was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1899 to Italian immigrant parents. He grew up in a rough neighborhood where violence wasn't rare, it was normal. By his teenage years, Capone had already joined street gangs. It was during one of these early street fights that his face was slashed, leaving deep scars on his left cheek. But here's something most people don't know. Capone absolutely hated the nickname that made him famous: Scarface. To his friends, he wasn't Scarface at all. He was called Snorky, a slang term meaning well-dressed and sharp. Capone cared deeply about appearances. He wore tailored suits, polished shoes, and always tried to present himself like a businessman, not a thug. In fact, he was so sensitive about his scars that he often posed for photos with the left side of his face turned away from cameras. And despite the violent origin of those scars, Capone later told people they came from his time in the military, even though he never served a single day. That's the first contradiction in Capone's life: a man built on violence, trying to sell himself as respectable. But respectability was never what he was heading toward, because by his mid-20s, Chicago was about to change everything. Part 2. The rise of a criminal empire. Capone moved to Chicago under the influence of gangster Johnny Torrio, who recognized his ambition and lack of fear. When Torrio retired after an assassination attempt, something unexpected happened. At just 26 years old, Al Capone became the boss of one of the most powerful criminal organizations in America, and he didn't waste time. During Prohibition, alcohol was illegal, but demand was higher than ever. Capone turned that law into a billion-dollar opportunity. His organization controlled breweries, smuggling routes, nightclubs, gambling dens, and protection rackets. At its peak, Capone's empire was making around $100 million a year, which would be billions today. But what's even more shocking? His reign at the top lasted only about 6 years. In that short time, he became the most feared man in Chicago, and one of the most famous criminals in the world. Yet while Capone was building his empire, something strange was happening far away from the headlines. Something inside his own family. Part 3. The family secret. Al Capone had an older brother named Richard. But unlike Al, Richard chose a very different path. He changed his name to Richard Hart and became a lawman, a prohibition officer tasked with enforcing the very laws Al Capone was breaking. Think about that for a moment. One brother running illegal alcohol across Chicago, the other trying to shut down men exactly like him. It's one of the most ironic family splits in criminal history, and neither brother ever truly crossed paths in a meaningful way during their careers. 2 lives, same blood, completely opposite sides of the law. Part 4. The public image game. Despite his violent reputation, Capone carefully shaped how the public saw him. During the Great Depression, when thousands of Americans were starving, Capone opened soup kitchens in Chicago. Reports suggest he fed thousands of people every day. To many struggling families, Capone wasn't a monster. He was a provider. He also loved the press. Unlike most crime bosses who hid in the shadows, Capone spoke openly to reporters. His famous attitude was simple. He was just a businessman, giving people what they wanted. But behind that image was a darker truth, because law enforcement couldn't prove most of what he was accused of, not even murder. Part 5. The case that changed everything. Capone was linked to countless violent crimes, including the infamous St. Valentine's Day massacre. But legally, he was never convicted of murder. In fact, he was never even charged for it. Many people think Eliot Ness brought Capone down, but that's Hollywood fiction. The real breakthrough came from Treasury agents who studied Capone's finances. They discovered something shocking: a man with millions in income, but no legal tax records. While witnesses disappeared and murder cases went cold, one thing remained impossible to hide: money. Capone was eventually convicted of tax evasion and sentenced to prison. But even before that, he had already been arrested for carrying a concealed weapon in Philadelphia and served time briefly. The empire was starting to crack. But the final collapse wasn't just legal. It was physical. Part 6. The Fall of Al Capone. During his time in prison, Capone's health began to decline rapidly. He had contracted syphilis years earlier, but never received proper treatment. Over time, the disease attacked his brain. His memory weakened. His judgment faded. His personality changed. By the time he was released, the once feared king of Chicago was no longer the man people remembered. Doctors estimated his mental ability had been severely reduced, almost childlike in function. The man who once controlled a criminal empire could barely manage his own life. In 1947, Al Capone died in Florida at just 48 years old, far younger than most people expect for a legend so large. Al Capone's story is full of contradictions. A violent gangster who hated his own nickname, a criminal who fed the poor, a man never convicted of murder, brought down by taxes, and a king of Chicago who ruled for only 6 years. But maybe the most shocking truth is this: Capone didn't fall because of his enemies, or even because of the law. He fell because every empire, no matter how powerful, always leaves a paper trail. And in the end, paper was stronger than power. If you enjoy true mafia history and untold stories from the criminal underworld, subscribe for more episodes uncovering the facts Hollywood often leaves out. Which Al Capone facts surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments.